there is a risk there that people are just like so empowered to like do one-off solutions that they never build like product. They never build like reusable modules and kind of like look at it. And then, because they're over generating and just kind of like solving for the current need as it continues to work and it breaks, it's gonna be pretty hard to go and look at it.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Deep Learning with PolyAI, the only podcast where host and guest are rocking branded gear. Hello.
I have to zoom out.
I know you do. I know. You'll just have to trust us, viewers. And if you're listening, you wouldn't know anyway. There we go. There we go. Awesome. Joining me, as per usual, is Nikola Merchik, CEO and co-founder of PolyAI. Hey, Nikola.
Hey, how's it going?
Not too bad. How are you?
Pretty good. Just trying to make sure that, I get that logo now in there.
Yeah, so we have to make it's not branded enough with all the other frames and stuff like that. We need PolyAI everywhere.
Can't think about it.
Because PolyAI is everywhere. Thank you. All right, enough of our self-promotion. Nikola, I read an interesting contribution to the Harvard Business Review from a author named Mark Azal Sanders, who basically asked the question, what are people really using generative AI for in 2025? And this is written off a precursor that was submitted to HBR last year that asked the same question. And what was interesting about this was seeing how some of the most popular responses had changed, either gained in popularity, dropped in popularity, or fell off completely, in addition to seeing what new use cases have really evolved in the last year. So I thought I might surprise you by asking a little bit, kind of doing a pop quiz off what you think the most popular answers were, and then we can just kind of run from there. Sound good?
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I mean, like, we start with ourselves. Like, I think of the latest thing where I realized that LLMs are indispensable to me is I had an overflowing kind of like flower pot in the garden, and I had to drill holes in it. So I was like, how do I do this? Which bolt drill like ending do I need to like drill through ceramics without breaking it, right? So, you take a photo, you're like, hey, which one? Well, they're like, the lighter ones are for like walls and concrete. The darker ones are for like wood and metal. So I use the one on the right. I was like, I've spent so much of my life just like going with this one, that one, this one, that one, right? And I've broken things. I've drilled through walls with woefully inadequate things. Hell is cool. Wow, this is like, I'm superhuman. Chill, I have access to knowledge and wisdom that might otherwise take for a whole life of, DIY work. So, no, I see people using them vastly differently. I constantly like to challenge, like, are people using it on a daily basis? And man, most people are not, right? Kids cheating.
The adoption has skyrocketed even over the last 12 months, just on a consumer basis, and not just from awareness, but because people are seeing value.
It's an exponential function. It's an exponential function. Right. It's just like, I look at like people who are not like in tech and like, I'm like, I don't think everyone's using it nonstop. Yes. But yeah, it is exploding, right? And I feel like, you tell people, hey, you can ask about this, and then like they go, oh, let me try it, and then they get hooked on everything else, right?
Right. Interesting.
What's your latest?
Most recently, I would say that I've used it to ask that what seems to me to be a constant question is, what kind of dinner can I make for a picky family using these ingredients? Because this is what I have. And it's surprisingly proficient. It's interesting because you mentioned about the DIY stuff and the home improvement. Thinking back on like when one of the first multimodal models came out, it was the demonstration that was given, and I want to say it was OpenAI. It was taking a picture of like your toolkit and saying, I need to replace this gear or something on my bike, and here are my tools. Which tool do I need to use for this? Yeah. So it was interesting. The DIY is kind of your big thing. For me, it's mostly food related. It's tell me what I can make with this and make it prepared and from like oven to plate in 30 minutes or less. And so that's what I do. And that's the big stress test for me for generative AI.
That is really awesome. I don't really cook my hands.
Well, I'm the house cook. But what was interesting to discover in reading this article is that it was actually in the top 20 was people using that specific use case. Tell me what I can make with these ingredients. So I was like, I'm glad to know that I'm not alone out there.
Short clips where people guess, top 10 things and you leave the last one hanging. Did we get any of the top 10 yet? DIY, cooking?
Yeah. So we did not. We did not get the top 10. Let me ask you this question though. Number
Okay.
one use case for people. Number one use case this year. It was not number one last year. It's number one this year. What do you think it might be? And remember, the general question to a very diverse set of respondents is, what do you use generative AI for? What do you use LLMs for?
God, I mean, directly or like just in general, like any product and version.
I would say directly.
Directly, I don't know, it has to be for work, right? Kind of like, completing like written materials and finalizing answers, content, animations. No,
No, it's
of kind of place.
therapy. It's therapy and relationship building.
Okay. I mean, okay. I
So
think
the
that's so.
number one use case is therapeutic. And not only that, but number two and three are finding purpose and organizing my life. So now the top three use cases for generative AI revolve around sort of self and personal development. Does that make sense?
So they recently changed the way that it stores memory, right? And I remember going like, okay, tell me about me. And it said like you have a cat who is on thin ice. And I remember that was a conversation that I had back home where I'm like, how do I like get my cat to not behave terribly so my wife doesn't decide to get rid of it, right? And I was like, wait, no, that's a bad memory. The cat's like, it's so bond rating has improved. It is not about to be kicked out for being with one event. But yeah, no, okay, I've done it. Not much of it, but yeah, I've done it. Have you done it?
No, I haven't. I
Well,
haven't actually.
management, you know.
I don't.
There
I
was
don't
an
know.
example, I think, of a large financial institution where it was discovered that it was used to write performance reviews. I guess that's a form of interpersonal therapy, right? Uh, I don't know how many people would freely admit that in that survey if they feel identified, but they were fine for it. It's not okay to do it, but yeah.
Right. No, I mean, I think it's an interesting concept, but I don't know. I still see the idea of utilizing LLMs as like a research function and not something that's connecting on the personal level. And I mean, I've heard like really strong models, and obviously like I've had conversations with just incredible LLMs that feel and look human. And, it's a basis for our value proposition, I think, in customer service. But the idea of seeking like therapy or guidance in life, I don't know. It's just something that doesn't, I'm still staying in the fridge, I guess, with when I'm reaching out to these sort of tools for their practical and logical application. It's not so much the emotional piece. I don't think that sings to me.
So is it emotional or just like general like problem solving related?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I do reach out for like the problem solving, but I don't see human problems as being like the logical that there's a logical solve for it. I see that as being more emotional and connected. Now, that being said, I'm pretty much damning a lot of
Yeah.
the like that social work and therapy practice out there because a lot of it is rooted in logic, right? But yeah, for me personally, I never equate those two. I never think to myself, I'm having some issues with this. Maybe I should, you know, hit up
You
GPT.
never started question how it's changed because I think I remember writing like the first chapter of my PhD and like you try to sound smart. So you write about like okay like Rogerian psychotherapy. The first dialogue system was ELISA and it was 200 lines of code, just 200 lines of code, like deterministic code, which would take your sentence, parse it around, and ask you in the form of a question. So you continue talking because much of like therapy is about getting people to have a reckoning with
Right.
themselves and their little things. So you can't help but wonder, like, it really depends on what data it was trained on, like which stylistic approach. I've never like had therapy, but like I imagine that there's this Rogerian way that I read about, which is like you ask and you're just kind of keep going. Or is there like maybe a more like purpose oriented conversation where you give advice actively? We need to get a guest who knows more about this. And
I'm sure
I
we can.
imagine they were not what the LLM was fed with in order to do a good job, right?
It's so interesting that you said that. It's basically the entire 200 lines of coding are around like rephrasing questions, and
Yeah.
it's just like, I think maybe that's a criticism or an observation for a lot of that industry is, aren't you just kind of asking me to get me to continue talking?
I think the real trick is like to do the right one and to kind of like
Right.
just, it's almost like a verse like martial arts specialist who, like, and we move out here and move out here. And by the time they're done and they've tired themselves out, I'm just standing there looking, right? So I think to mellow down people's defenses and stuff, you kind of get them to just like, you stay silent and you wait for them to continue talking. And the power of silence cannot be overstated, right?
Right.
Just meaningless thing which gets them, but you shouldn't, I think, impact people's flow. um so it is fascinating. I am surprised by the incidents. What's number two?
So number two is finding purpose in life and just organizing yourself and organizing your life. So finding purpose and organizing your life. Those are two and three.
Wow.
The first real professional application, I guess you could say, comes in the area of coding. So both building new code and improving existing code. And that makes a ton of sense. But
What's
just
jump
pause for yeah, yeah.
when is it from?
This was just released. So this was basically the 2025 findings. So let's say the last 2 or 3 months.
Because I mean, coding has exploded, right? With cursor, with all of these things, it's bigger than it was like 3 months ago. Vibe coding and all that. So it has to have, well, who knows? I mean, I guess the population for developers is still not that high in the grand scheme of things.
Do you think with that, explosive utilization in the world of coding that it's also one of the things that we sort of air caution to is this concept of bloat? You generate a lot of you can generate a lot of great code, but you can also generate a lot of bad code if the prompts are incorrect. And if you're not, this supercharging tool can go both ways. So um are we seeing a lot of that as well? So not only just utilization for building and improving code, but also
I think it's inevitable, right? I think that, if you attempt to solve a problem just on its own without like clearly thinking about where it is in the architectural grand scheme of the system and stuff. Um, if you're unafraid, like, a lot of like good elegance in coding and software development comes from like thinking precisely about what you need to do, the minimum kind of like number of steps you need to take to do it within like the defined system paradigms. Um, you know, minimal changes you have to make so that it's usable by others, readable by others, right? That's a big quality in code. Um, I imagine that like a lot of the generated code is readable, but again, it doesn't need to be because it's like it changed the trade-off between writing a bunch of code versus like structuring it well so you can reuse it over and over again and then it becomes more readable, usable. Then if you want to improve a specific bit, you just improve it there and it improves everywhere, right? So there is a risk there that people are just like so empowered to like do one-off solutions that they never build like product. They never built like reusable modules and kind of like look at it. And then, because they're over generating and just kind of like solving for the current need as it continues to work and it breaks, it's going to be pretty hard to go and look at it. I guess at that point, they'll be relying on this system to observe it in the system in its entirety and fix specific things. Now, that's a whole lot more reasoning and understanding and speculating around how it might be used there by whom. Depends on documentation. It's a brand new world, right? I think that, even with just like increased layers of abstraction and programming before LLMs, right? Where we had Python instead of writing things carefully, slowly, like C or below assembly code and stuff. Like there, you'd have to think really hard before you write some code. And in that thinking, you think of how to optimize and structure it. And you think of what else you might need it for later and how it might be used. So you might anticipate some of that. So you don't have to go write new code in its entirety. Um, like here, you won't, right? And even in Python, relative to like, see, like the code ran more slowly, right? And then you had entire industries of like how you compile, because like higher level code is turned into lower level code, and then the compiler optimizes it so that it runs them in the most efficient way possible. The meta level compiling here is like, well, I'll generate a whole bunch of code, go rationalize it all, right? But that's a much taller order because it assumes that you have visibility over the whole environment and like inputs, outputs. It's complicated, right? I think that at the end of the day, like when people go like SaaS is that in companies don't need to provision software because you'll just be like, build me a system that's, spins up the video thing and records two people and, turns it into a podcast or looks like that. Like, sure, but then if a glitch happens and stuff, how are you going to fix it? Right.
right.
go re-record it, or even like, because when you buy software, you're kind of buying the throat to choke. You're saying, hey, like Poly is on the hook for my customer service, not dropping. And if it drops, it might be their system or it might be something else, but like they're gonna help me figure it out to at least remove doubt that it's not our system, right? So similarly here, I think that you'll still need software. It's just gonna get easier to do, and it's gonna get a lot more competitive, and we're all getting a lot more productive. But we're still gonna have to think about how it all fits together, um, in functional real-time systems that need to run for a long time.
As far as operational culpability, though, is the fact that for the most part, LLMs are sort of a faceless and throatless throat to choke. Is that what makes it challenging, maybe for pilots to succeed? I know we've talked in the past that a vast majority of generative pilots within enterprise kind of fail, as pilots are supposed to, but do they fail because there's no real like culpable element?
I don't think that's the case, right? Because I mean, when they're trialing things there, I think it's more like if we go back to like the DIY analogy, right?
Yeah.
You could fix something one off if you're a sloppy like handyman, right? Like
Okay.
I were doing your lighting and I realized that, I need to like connect two wires and I'm not sure how something's off, something's missing. Maybe I just take those two wires and put in like a new LED driver and I couldn't find your old one in your spotlight. Just leave it there, right? Then later, God knows, maybe there's a fire and that thing catches on and people thought that was just wool, but it isn't. Maybe there's a whole lot of like old equipment there, right?
Yeah.
So the danger is that you're always just, let's say, you have like I don't know, a fuse goes out in your house, right? And it might be because you're, I don't know, plugging in a thing with the wrong voltage into the plug and you did it once and you forgot about it. You go and you rewire the whole house. Later, you might plug in the same thing and like blow it all again, right? Instead of just saying, okay, well, this popped. Why did it pop? You go debugging, right? You flip the switch again. You figure it out, and then you kind of like maybe need to do something localized that fixes that problem. And a lot of these problems, especially for mission critical software, they don't happen all the time. They happen very rarely. A lot of them are unexpected, right? So when they happen for the first time, you better hope you fix it, right? Because I mean, worst case is, let's say it's like a security problem. You fix it once, you get the system back up and running and you go, oh, maybe it was a bug. Oh, did someone exploit my security vulnerability or, just like what happened? You don't know. And maybe you patch it up, you put a bit of like stick and sellotape and maybe it runs for the next 50 years, or maybe it breaks and causes a catastrophic problem, you know, a week later, right? So
Right.
it's really about that. It's gonna, I think, make for a lot of like bad software engineering that's gonna be exploded, and it's gonna be pretty hard to like even follow what happened because there'll be like a series of people came in and did something to fix the problem. No one
Right.
really. We all kind of like pushed it under the table and hope that no one that would come back again, right? And in software, this happens all the time. So um, you can very easily often find a test case failing. You reject the logic that test case is no longer failing. Do you understand why it wasn't failing, or did you just like shake the whole thing?
Right. Does this account for why reasoning models are so popular and gaining in popularity?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that we need things that are gonna have the ability to understand what's actually going on.
But then
Um,
also paint the step by step so you can go in and identify where maybe it went wrong.
well, yeah, I mean, that's really help because it gives us like at least some kind of proof. Again, like did they follow the right chains of reasoning and stuff? That's a whole different game because they could have like a leap of faith somewhere in between that may not be right, but at least you can audit it and kind of like have a bit more confidence over what happened.
Yeah. Interesting. Going back to some of the stuff that was kind of jumping in popularity as it ties to sort of new industry utilization, understanding contracts, generating contracts, sort of the legal environment, getting a massive boost from generative AI based on utilization. Medical advice, actually seeking medical advice from LLMs, going beyond the WebMD search, of here's my symptom. What do I have? I
Yeah.
probably ushering in an entirely new era of panic. When I've been coughing for 3 days. What is it?
I mean, listen, whenever I look up anything on WebMD, the conclusion is they have 7 cancers and, like that time is running out. But I've not found LLMs to be as problematic with that. Like,
No.
pretty good, which maybe shows how responsible I am. But hey,
Well, maybe being able to inject a little bit of context makes it easier because, as you know, when you do a cold hard search in WebMD and it comes back with this, it doesn't say, but chances are it isn't this, whereas LLMs probably do that. So it makes a lot of sense. But then a lot of the other things are multimodal, so generating videos, generating images, relevant images to a particular search, etc. And sort of fun and games nonsense is really boosted, which is funny when you think about how resource heavy every prompt is for LLMs. The fact that people are out there, just kind of goofing around.
I mean, I don't know if you know this.
Kind of,
Google Chrome has started adding like multimodal stuff where you can like search media, do the button above the keyboard when you're in there, or activate voice in a multimodal way. So it's coming. It's coming really fast, and we get a lot more excited.
it sounds exciting. And obviously it'll take you into the next step of your DIY. So going on beyond drilling into clay pots, can we add a wing to the new house? What's going to happen here?
Yeah, no, I think it's sky's the limit. It's already like helped me, with like lighting stuff, etc. It's gotten me to be a lot like braver experimenting with that stuff. Hopefully I don't miss that. But I think live video and stuff helping you with it while you're working on it. I think that's like the ultimate edition, right? It's like, hey, we need that. Okay, let's go to Home Depot and buy stuff. Oh, well, that looks great, And then we maybe go back to the AR world of like you put glasses on and it's there to like help you. That thing, no, go back, right? Probably really cool.
Yeah, it would be. Ultimately, though, I think it's really interesting to see over the course of the last year, according to these findings, how I think the general utilization of generative AI more ties to personal development, emotional development, professional development, et cetera, and less on the technical assistance piece and the troubleshooting piece. So while there's still prevalent use cases, more people are using LLMs for, enhanced learning, skill development, personal emotional support than the coding tools. But as you said, it's a very explosive industry and it's changing and getting more capable.
It's really interesting because the whole narrative around them superseding search engines there, like begins like if it's all like information search, if it's not that kind of stuff. Why is it not? Why is it not more used? Like all of those people use Google at least once a day, right? So why is that not? And is it in the top 20? Like information retrieval and
let me see. So specific search appears at number 13.
okay. Still, it's not that you would have thought it higher, right?
Yeah, I would have thought it higher, but then maybe that's just a conditioning where people are still conditioned to use Google for search or their preferred search engine for search and haven't married these two worlds together. It'll come though.
Well, it's also just faster, right? Like even if into like ChatGPT is whereas Google, right? And that.
Right.
But how often do you go from one or the other?
What's that?
How often do you go like and use ChatGPT versus Google at this point?
I typically go when it's task based. I go to like a GPT or I go to an LLM. If it's just information gathering, like obviously I just go to search, and I don't even prefer, or I don't go to a search engine. I just utilize my mobile, type in the subject in the browser and then let it default to a search engine and bring me back the results.
Cool.
So it hasn't occupied sort of the one-stop shopping of all research and process like sourcing, but I'm sure it'll get there.
Yeah, I'm not really. I mean, I probably like ChatGPT probably like 3 times an hour, but it's not default, not for most things.
Again, time will tell, but I'm sure it'll eventually be like the single app device and whatnot. And that one app will do everything for us. But
Okay, we'll see.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Nikola. Great to chat with you as always. And for the rest of you, we'll see you next week. Have a good one.
See you there, Ren.